Hello, how you doing? How's your Monday been? It's been a bit grey today. I sat here, I've had sunshine, I've had sleet. It's been a bit grim actually for a Monday. What is this, the second Monday now? And I guess I've spent a lot of time at my desk, so after this is done, I'm going down there and away, and I'm going to go binge watch some box sets. It's important to look after ourselves. At this moment in time, just to make sure that we're doing everything we can to look after ourselves, to nourish our souls, and still have colour in our worlds, actually, and to appreciate those things that make us happy, make us feel more content, and make us feel a little bit more, I don't know, alive, I guess. Yes, that is Birmingham Blue Nails. I might not have anywhere to go, but this is still me trying to, well, it is me trying to still have some colour in my life. So it's not that blue as always, but I wanted to do something that makes me feel a little bit happier, makes me feel a little bit more content. And I talk with my hands, so you might see this blurry mass. I was thinking, I think since was it Saturday, the last time I did this, as to what I might read, what I might share, and I was reflecting on how I looked at my pile and I said, some of these might be a bit grim, might not be savoury enough, I guess, to read. I thought, well, how is that helping anybody? You can sit here and you can read romance and fluffiness and everything else and still, escape from everything. Or you can stay within the moment and think about what it is that reaches people anyway. So today, there's this. This is Fragments. This was the very first piece of fiction that I ever wrote. Regular viewers, regular readers of the blog, of this page, will know that everything that I've written so far, it started off with gardening, with chili plants of all things. And it's 5 years ago this year, in August, that I published my first book, which was, hold on, let me see if I can get it for you, 2 seconds. Was this one. As you can see, it looks quite different. But this is actually at the moment proving to be really very popular. I think I was trying to do the maths earlier. It's currently free, as is Fragments, on Kindle. And I think there's something like 162 e-copies have been downloaded in the States alone. And who knows, maybe I should read one of these bits for you at some point in the coming weeks. Maybe. I'll think about that. As to whether that will be of any use to anyone, maybe, who knows. But tonight, what I wanted to do was read some of this. You can see there's bits of post-it here and things. So what is this? This is Fragments, and I would say this is the first bit that I wrote. I think this is now 3 years old. Yes, three and a bit. It was published in March, actually, 3 years ago, and it is a fairly meaty tome. It's not a small tome. I think there's 80,000 words in here. 80,000 words, and what exactly does this book centre on? Let's have a look at the blurb, shall we? Life starts and life ends. In between, we form relationships and friendships. We have husbands, wives, sons, daughters, and we mustn't forget pets. Memories form that shape who we are and what we do, only for death to cast it all askew. What we know becomes nothing but fragments, torn up and thrown to the winds. The characters in the story. The nuns lose a wife and a mother. Matthew is lost like his grandmother. Daniel loses a man he loved. Michael wonders about having children, and Maya is a mother bereaved. Within the pages of Fragments are 6 interrelated stories that explore what happens when the universe as we know it implodes and entirely. Grief is a journey to be travelled by them, with emotions to be experienced as their lives are changed. Whilst they feel alone, they're all connected, and these are their stories. Family, friends, and even our pets cannot escape when it comes to the footprint that is left by death. And this is what I was worried about, that it is grim. But in reality, that's probably why I wrote it in the first instance. If you don't read it, if you don't write it, people don't read about it, people don't then, I don't know, they don't, it's a very much, we experience it, but we don't talk about it. And what I thought about, I was flicking through this earlier actually, trying to think, well, what do I read? What do I share with you that isn't grim, that isn't isn't going to cause distress, and is, I can read it safely without me feeling distressed. Because believe it or not, there are bits of this book that I can read and look at that make me cry, and I wrote the damn thing. The writing process of this was an interesting process, and it's something that I won't forget. It's probably the meatiest book that I will ever write or feel compelled to write. Nothing ever is going to be as big as this, or I don't know, it's a big part of my soul anyway. So what is it that I'm looking at today? The chapter that I'm going to read from today is concerned with Matthew, and it's actually called Grandmother's Sponge Cake. And hello Uzma, how are you? And it's about this young man, and like a lot of my books, there's food involved, and today we're looking at Grandmother's Sponge Cake. So shall we see what happens? Oh, Matt, what did you do with the cake? Unbeknown to Matthew, Lydia had come into the kitchen and was standing by the now vacant cake stand. Your dad, he bought that for tea time. Don't tell me that you... Seeing that he was in fact sat on the floor with a drawer open, she realised that something wasn't right. What exactly are you doing down there? She asked, moving towards him and kneeling down besides. Turning to face her, Michael pursed his lips to speak, only the words wouldn't come out. He turned back to the card that he'd been looking at, as he held it between his finger and thumb, poised, ready to be taken out of the box. It didn't look particularly nice, said Matthew, taking the card out and snapping the tin closed. He let the tin rest in his lap with the card flat against his palm. Probably wouldn't have tasted good either. He looked at the card and studied the lists on the ingredients. Uncomfortable in having to kneel upon the floor, Lydia leant across Matthew and gently took the card from his hand. A homemade cake might taste better, I suppose. Lydia held onto the card as she spoke and put my teeth in. Lydia held onto the card as she spoke and rose up to her feet. She read through the ingredients, using her finger to work down the list, and then turned it over to scan the method. You know, Matt, continued Lydia, I've never really made one. Not really. A cake. Lily would always say that I should try to make one, even if I ended up burning it. Matthew pushed the drawer closed by pressing the front with his palms. Splaying his fingers on the floor either side of him, he used his hands to springboard himself up to his feet, having unfurled his long legs. Dusting off his hands, he waited for Lydia to finish reading the recipe card and hand it back. Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. She promptly held the recipe card out towards him, knowing that she didn't even need to ask. If you make a mess, though, she said, pulling out a second drawer, you clear it up. Lydia rifled through the drawer to find an apron that she knew was stashed inside. You follow the instructions, she said, unfolding a cornflower blue apron and pulling the neck strap overhead. Luckily for her, on her wrist was a black elasticated band. Sliding it over her wrist, she took it off her hand. Lydia gathered up her wiry brown hair and tugged the locks into a ponytail. I can be your glamorous assistant and, assist. Lydia arched her brows, having stated the obvious, and took the two short strings that snaked towards the floor, either side of her hips, to tie them up at the base of the spine. Matthew momentarily looked up from the card and said, You look very pretty. He then returned back to the recipe. The itemised list of ingredients was fairly simple. The list was straightforward, and that he wouldn't have to make a trip to the supermarket. Let's face it, going to the supermarket right now is a bit like, running a gauntlet, so he's on the right track there. All of the goods listed would have been in the kitchen anyway. Whilst he was occupied, Lydia had wandered around the kitchen. She was trying to empty the oven of assorted trays and baking sheets that were all stored inside. In doing so, she found two circular sponge tins and a wire cooling rack. Setting these upon the worktop, she moved the trays into the corner of the kitchen where they wouldn't interfere with the baking process. She then leant against the worktop and watched Matthew weave a path across the kitchen. The path that he moved along was familiar, in that she'd seen Lily take the same path when she'd been baking. Lydia could see that Matthew was staying true to it. She could see no deviations, no variations to it whatsoever. It was spot on. He too had watched Lily, and carefully at that, he was executing her movements exactly. With his movement, he knew exactly which cupboards had to be opened, which jars he would need, and even located the same mixing bowl and utensils that his grandmother would have used. There should be a set of scales behind you, said Matthew, as he aligned two jars together. Could you find them? We need to weigh sugar and flour. With her thoughts derailed, Lydia set about finding the scales. She had to open a few of the cupboards to find them, since she'd forgotten exactly where they were. When she did find the scales, they comprised of a colourless bowl that sat on a square platform with gradations that were marked in black and white. As she placed the scales next to the jars that Matthew had aligned, it struck Lydia just how dated the scales looked. A lot like the rest of the kitchen, try saying that slowly. A lot like the rest of the kitchen, the scales were showing their age and were probably older than both her and Matthew. Spoon! Matthew wiped flour from his hands onto his jeans and progressed across the kitchen into the cutlery drawer. Not looking as he moved, Lydia had to bite her lip and not reply with, "No thank you." All things considered, such a reply would have been in poor taste. "Wooden?" she asked, perfectly straight, poker-faced, pointing to a pot that stood by the Aga and held not one but 3 wooden spoons. "Yes," Matthew replied, taking one from the pot and clunking it flat onto the worktop. "And one of those," he said, raising aloft a metal spoon that had been fished out of the drawer. "And we still need to weigh things." He shifted himself towards the fridge. Taking the hint, Lydia unstoppered the jars of dried goods. This was no easy process, as she was so used to unscrewing lids of things. She was, however, in this instant, confronted by cork bungs, and therefore removing them was hardly second nature. Gripping the first jar in the crook of her arm, Lydia had to tug out the bung with some effort. You can just imagine it really, can't you? Initially non-compliant, she had to tease the bung along the neck of the jar with her finger, before grasping it with her fingers out across the circumference and yanking it out in a fluid motion. Doesn't sound particularly pretty now, does it? She lurched backwards with emotion. Had she not clamped the jar with her elbow, she might have dropped it to the floor, losing her grip, and smashed the entire thing. The fact that it was ceramic would have made for a bit of a mess. Looking at Matthew with a view of frustration, she opened the second one, having learned how to do it. Lily's mixing bowl was biscuit beige on the outside and white on the inside. It was one of the very first things that Matthew had located in opening and closing cupboards. A fairly traditional mixing bowl, it was probably used by grandmas like Lily up and down the country. Lydia was about to ask how much of the flour and sugar needed to be weighed out. As she turned, Matthew arrived next to her with Lily's recipe card and a butter dish. To be helpful, he'd already sliced the butter up into cubes. "Equal quantities," he said, slapping the recipe card onto the workshop. "The same amount of both sugar and flour. This stuff is probably soft enough and needs to be creamed with the sugar." Picking up a wooden spoon, he dropped it into the mixing bowl where it thudded against the ceramic. The way that Matthew stood, pivoting on one foot, suggested that he was on the move again, and quickly at that. When you are creaming, this means to mix up the batter and sugar into a paste. He was doing it in a very, very particular way. He did this very rarely, but he was doing it to emphasise a point. Holding up his finger, he waggled it repeatedly. "Creaming takes elbow grease," he said, before trundling off, back to the fridge. Biting the inside of her cheek, Lydia refrained from making a barbed comment. All things considered, this was not the time to start a fight. She was supposed to be helping with the cake and helping Matthew process this in whatever way he wanted to. At any other point, she might have entered into a war of words, just not today. The sugar had been weighed, and combining with the sugar in the bowl, butter, Lydia did her best to mix the two together. What Matthew had said about the butter being soft enough was far from the truth, and it did take some effort to combine the smooth butter with the gritty, granulated sugar. The bit about elbow grease, well, that was certainly true. It did take time to do. As Lydia struggled with the creaming process, Matthew was looking for some more butter and the 4 eggs that the recipe demanded. He expected to find the eggs in the fridge. That's where he would look for them, at home, and that was his normal conditioned response. What he eventually remembered was that in this kitchen the eggs were kept near the dark brown ceramic chicken. Doesn't everyone have one of those? He felt as though he would have kicked himself, a look evident from the look of despondence that had flashed across his face. Finding the chicken, he moved the ceramic bird and liberated the eggs that he needed. These were scooted over to Lydia, and his instructions were clear. As he adopted the pivot foot stance again, I think we all do that. "Could you beat these in, please, one by one? The flour, we fold that in afterwards." He turned away and headed towards the fridge. Whilst the decor of the kitchen was rather dated and betrayed the age of the house, its occupants too, some of the appliances were actually quite modern and somewhat anachronistic. Opening the fridge demanded a huge, hefty tug. The doors were rather broad and weighty. Matthew wondered just how easily his grandparents were able to use it. There had been a few grumbles when it was first installed, so using it on a daily basis probably would have bothered them. Even the fridge in his own kitchen was not so stout or so robustly built. He needed another pack of butter from the fridge, and fortunately there were a few to choose from. Wrapped in a golden metallic cover, any notion of butter being bad for you was burnished away by shiny packaging that made it look rather attractive. Matthew tore away a 1-inch strip, Matthew tore away a 1-inch strip from all the way around the block, allowing him to grease the cake tins. These had been washed and dried, whilst Lydia was still creaming the cake mix, and now sat on the drainer where a tea towel was draped across them. "Hello, Anna, how are you? Now, what would you like me to do?" Lydia inquired. The wooden spoon that she'd been using was raised high as though she was about to beat a drum. You know that feeling when I pick up a drum. "Eggs are done," she said, waving the spoon around. She caught Matthew in transit along his flight path in the kitchen. She waited till she had his attention. He had stopped as though he was gliding across the floor in a similar way to ballerina might have been acting out a scene from Swan Lake. Seeing him made her fixed expression of concentration give way to a smile that became an irrepressible burst of laughter. "Fold the flour in with a metal spoon," he said, before he heard her laughter. "And what's so funny?" he asked, heading towards the waiting cake tins. Shaking her head, Lydia picked up a metal spoon to start folding in the flour. You were gliding across," she said, a bit like a ballerina. She was laughing now quite a bit, but managed to fold in the flour carefully. "You just don't do that in our kitchen," she added. "It doesn't matter. It's just a bit funny, that's all." So, as innocuous as it sounds, that is an extract from Fragments, and we know that Matthew loses his grandma, Lily, and his girlfriend Lydia is the one helping him, and she's helping him through, I guess, him making cake. Cake was significant in that story, something that he felt really quite strongly about. So there you have it. There's a bit from Fragments. As I say, it's something of a massive, meaty book that I might come back to you at some point and share with you. Certainly not for the faint-hearted. It takes time to read. Tissues, I think, are required for this, and a duvet, and sit and take your time and process it. So here we have it. I have no idea what time it is. I don't know how long I've been reading, but hopefully that has offered you a little bit of an escape. You've got an understanding of how to make sponge cake as well. Creaming of butter and sugar in equal quantities. And who doesn't like cake? So I hope you've enjoyed that. So until next time, stay safe. Stay safely isolated, socially distant at home. And I guess I will see you next time. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.